Welcome to the Writer Reads Short Stories. This is The Politics of Dragons, Part 3 of 5. He had been away from the estate for a scant 3 days, and he had sent Seppolitis with his rejection 2 days ago. It was more than enough time for the she-dragon to have raided the more remote outposts and farmlets of his domain. He wondered if she'd struck any of the towns closest her border. None of them knew they'd built so close to a dragon's domain. He snorted. It was doubtful even the Lord Knight ruling the other kingdom knew. Highly doubtful, he amended, given what she is. He wondered that Kavera had not noticed. "My man," he prompted, and Kavera gave an impatient huff. "Very well," she snarled, and the air beside her shivered, until a curtain dropped away, revealing Seppolitis, his form wreathed in lightning and fire, his body encased in icy light. Lord Bright drew a sharp breath, one that was echoed from 5 other throats. He didn't blame his guard for their sudden fear, although Sergeant Argoran's question came as a surprise. "Is he okay?" Bright frowned, studying his familiar. The young man looked all right, but it was difficult to tell. The 7th son of a 7th son. Seppolitis had shunned the wizarding tradition. To see him displaying this much power in his own defence was not what Bright had expected. It was, however, better than the alternative. Kavera had allies. He scowled as he observed the bat-like wings and serpentine tails of the 2 women glaring sulkily at Seppolitis's protections. One pivoted on her long-nailed toes to give the dragoness a baleful look. "If you cannot do something about this, our deal is off," she hissed, and then noticed the window, her face shifting from surprise to consternation before moving to sly amusement as she addressed Bright. She extended a long-clawed finger towards Seppolitis's shields. "Is this yours?" she asked, even as the familiar's boundaries flared. "He is," Bright declared, "and I want him returned unharmed." He cocked his head. "At least, unharmed any further than he already is. I will take it very personally if I find your scent on him." "Ooh, territorial, aren't we?" The succubus flicked a glance at the young man, and then took another look at Bright, her eyes glowing with momentary fire, her tongue flickering from her mouth and shifting from human to something less so. Bright clenched his jaw, fury rippling through him, his body beginning to glow with heat. He didn't need the sound of frantic scrambling to realize he'd shifted from man to dragon without a thought. He was only relieved his guard had moved to give him room, and not stabbed him for his inattention. "So be it," he rumbled, and before Kavera could guess his attention, Bright leapt up and through the window the female dragon had opened between them. "Seppolitis, I am coming." "And us," Captain Ingeri shouted, although Bright didn't know how the man intended to follow. He should have expected the sound of running footsteps to be followed by the rapid clatter of hooves, and more than one set. It sounded like they were going to. No sooner had Bright's feet touched the floor of Kavera lair than he leapt out of the landing zone. "Are you insane?" he bellowed, the words greeted by Ingeri's laughter as the man's stallion landed and pivoted toward Kavera. "Get the boy," Ingeri shouted. "We'll deal with the dragon." "You'll what?" Bright roared, but his voice was eclipsed by Kavera scream of outrage and pain. One of the succubi standing in front of his familiar cast a swift look toward it, and touched her comrade on the shoulder. Time to leave. Bright lashed out with his forepaw, his jaws snapping closed on empty air. The succubi were gone, leaving only their laughter at his attempts. "Another time, dragon. Perhaps when you're in the mood for sharing." "Never!" Bright thundered. One quick look assured him Seppolitis was fine. Fatigued, perhaps, but capable of holding his shelter in place a little longer. His knights, on the other hand. "Ingeri!" Bright barked, but the captain of his guard ignored him. The man had dismounted to close with the beast that was Kvergeshom, moving under her reach to seek a vulnerability. The dragoness's head twisted this way and that as she tried to track the knight's movements, but she had 4 other attackers to consider, and they had moved so they could harry her flanks. To Bright's relief, the horses moved out of the she-dragon's reach and milled anxiously on the other side of the great hall that served as her throne room and hall of audience. "You should not have threatened what is mine," Bright told Kvergeshom. Her head snapped round, her eyes narrowing as she glared at him. "You were the one who sent him into danger," she snarled, just as Ingeri gave a roar of effort and made a 2-handed thrust into her ribs, right behind her forelegs. Kvergeshom screamed, curving her neck in an attempt to find the knight, but Ingeri was pressed too close for her jaws to reach. He twisted the blade, grinding it back and forth in the wound until he was forced away from her leg and further under her chest. "No!" Bright shouted, trying to reach her as she dropped her leg out from under herself. He was going to be too slow. Too late. But his cry of denial was matched by another, and magic hissed across his skin as lightning blurred across the room. No, not lightning, he realized as he charged, but the boy. And where exactly had Seppolitis learned that particular maneuver? "Leandel!" Or gained the right to ask that name for help? Seppolitis barreled into the dragon's side, ducking down and heaving up as if he was strong enough to shift the dragon's weight or stop her crushing him and Ingeri together. Bright followed, closing his jaws around Kvergeshom's neck as the she-dragon twisted to see where the other knights were. Why was that name familiar? And why did he think the name Seppolitis had called on was going to have dire consequences? It was not, after all, the name of a god. Bright's teeth pierced scale and skin, strangling Kvergeshom's cries as he slammed into her, letting his charge carry him past her. He flicked his head as he went, yanking her off balance and toppling her away from Seppolitis and Ingeri. Bones snapped, and the scent of scorched flesh and lightning filled the air. Ingeri's cry of protest was ragged with pain. "Do you mind? I'm attached to that blade." Seppolitis's retort didn't sound much better. "Needed a conduit." Ingeri's reply was softer. "Hold on, boy. I'll get you out." Out of where? Bright crunched down on Kvergeshom's neck, shaking it savagely. When it separated from her body, he stumbled, put momentarily off balance by the lack of resistance. The sudden rush of blood caught his attention, and he spat it out, his stomach lurching with hunger as he fought the urge to feast. Perhaps if his men had not been present. The sound of bugles split the air, and he raised his head. The roar that followed wasn't entirely unexpected, and Bright roared in response, staking his claim and his victory. "My lord?" Ingeri's voice was enough to bring him back to the present. Claws scraped in the corridor leading to the front gates of Kvergeshom's fortress. Bright's nostrils flared. He knew this scent, and had hoped to be gone before she realized anything was amiss. "Hold!" he commanded, taking a firm grip on the instinct to roar a challenge and throttling it deep. Instead, he pulled himself back to human form, wiping dragon's blood from his lips with the back of his hand as the world swayed around him. Bright dropped to one knee, giving himself time to gain his equilibrium. "My lord!" Ingeri's voice held a touch of alarm, and the man stumbled to his side. His concern was echoed by Seppolitis, the boy arriving with the guard captain, both of them leaning on each other like they wouldn't remain standing if they didn't. "Master!" Bright pushed to his feet. "I'm all right." He half turned to inspect the pair and saw they really were holding each other up. "I can—" The door crashed open, torn from its hinges to slam into the floor. The dragon filling the doorframe glowed too bright to look at. "Where is he?" she roared, and Bright felt her gaze falling on him. You! He had no choice but to shift back to his draconic form, his mind racing to think of a way of appeasing the dragon whose territory he had unwittingly invaded in order to save his familiar. Steel scraped as more than one blade cleared its sheath, and his men hurried forward to stand between the she-dragon and their lord. She was not impressed. "You dare!" she thundered, and Captain Ingeri unlooped his arm from around Sepelitus's waist. "Sorry, boy," he murmured, pushing Sepelitus away, even as he pulled the blade from the young man's belt. "You broke mine." "Wait!" Sepelitus began, and Bright thought he was speaking to the captain. "Wait!" The repetition drew his attention away from the problem of appeasing the dragon on whose lands he'd trespassed, and Bright saw his familiar swerve around the captain and stagger forward. "Mistress," the boy began, his arms wrapping his waist, and he doubled over even as he sought to catch her eye. "Please, please wait." Ingeri threw the sword aside and lunged after him. "What are you—" He skidded to a halt as the shining beast bounded over to land in front of him. The hand he'd thrust out to stop Sepelitus's fall grasped air as the boy pitched forward. "Please," Bright began, moving toward the dragoness. She caught Sepelitus before he could hit the floor, catching him in her palm and letting him rest there. Her lips rippled in a snarl as she snapped her head around to face Bright. He slowed his advance, risking a swift glance from her face to the boy. "Please, You do, of course, have an offering for me?" Her eyes narrowed. "A peace offering?" A peace offering? Bright caught the emphasis and stared at her. He'd left his home in too much of a hurry to think of such things. He looked around the room, wondering if she'd accept one of the horses, and if Ingeri would forgive him if he